Is it true you went to Michigan?
No, I did not go to Michigan, but thank you for bringing it up.
Where did you go again?
I went to Indiana.
I mean, you can't make it up, can you?
No.
Jesse just listens.
He listens. What's that?
Happy Friday, everyone.
Yeah, happy Friday. Greg is going to not smoke weed.
No? How do you know that?
For Jesse is. Celebration.
I have to go tape a show.
Go tape a show.
Afterwards, that's another story.
Yeah. Who knows what you and Tyrus are going to be up to?
Me and Dobbs, we party. Me and Dobbs.
He would be the last person you'd want to smoke with. All right. All right.
I mean,
Set your DVRs. Never miss an episode of The Five. Have a great weekend, everybody. Special report. Up next, Brett.
Poor
save us.
Brett.
What happens up there in New York?
I know, right?
Have a good weekend, guys. Thanks, Jesse.
Right.
Democrats take collusion allegations to court, accusing multiple defendants of rigging the 2016 presidential election. The Comey memos did those missives involving conversations between the former FBI chief and the president break the law? We'll talk with one of the lawmakers who helped force the memo's release, plus whatever happened to Atlantic City. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. We begin tonight with a preemptive strike from Democrats ahead of any possible resolution to the Russia collusion investigation. The party is going to court, alleging a massive conspiracy to fix the last presidential election. There's also big news on the Comey memos and the possibility the former FBI chief may have broken the law. We start off, though, with the Democrats on the legal warpath and reaction from Republicans on that. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts traveling with the president in West Palm Beach, Florida. Good evening, John.
Brad, good evening to you. The Trump campaign is dismissing the Democratic lawsuit as nothing more than a political fundraising ploy. But the Democrats, using mostly news reports for evidence, claim there is a conspiracy by the Trump campaign to throw the election. The Democratic Party not waiting for the outcome of the Mueller investigation. Today filing a lawsuit claiming the Trump campaign, Russia, and WikiLeaks conspired to hack DNC servers and email accounts and throw the election. The DNC is seeking millions in damages. In a statement, DNC Chairman Tom Perez saying Russia launched an all-out assault on our democracy, and it found a willing and active partner in Donald Trump's campaign. The lawsuit does not name President Trump, but does target his son, Don Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, and Rick Gates, former Trump advisor George Papadopoulos, Joseph Misfoot, who told Papadopoulos the Russians had thousands of Hillary Clinton emails, and Aras and Ayman Agalarov, who helped President Trump stage the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow in 2013. The White House stayed silent on the suit, but the Trump campaign unloaded with both barrels. In a statement, campaign manager Brad Parscale saying this is a sham lawsuit about a bogus Russian collusion claim filed by a desperate, dysfunctional, and nearly insolvent Democratic Party. There's a great deal the American public wants to know about the corruption of the Democrats. President Trump stayed out of sight today, spending the day at his West Palm Beach golf club. But on Twitter this morning, he took aim at the just-released Comey memos, tweeting, "James Comey memos just out and show clearly that there was no collusion and no obstruction. Also, he leaked classified information. Wow, will the witch hunt continue?" The full Comey memos suggest no evidence of collusion, but do paint a more detailed picture of the Comey-Trump relationship than was revealed in either Comey's testimony last year or his new book. For example, President Trump's expectation of loyalty was in the context of FBI leaks. Comey writing, "I predicted he, like all presidents, would discover the entire government leaks like crazy." He replied that he needed loyalty and expected loyalty. Comey also wrote, "I explained that he could count on me to always tell him the truth. I said, I don't do sneaky things. I don't leak. I don't do weasel moves." The DOJ's Inspector General is now probing whether Comey leaked classified information when he gave his memos to a friend, a professor at Columbia University. And assurances Comey gave the president have since been contradicted by events. "I then explained what FBI people were like," Comey writes, "that whatever their personal views, they strip them when they step into their bureau roles and actually hold political people in slight contempt without regard to party." At one point, the president seems to suggest there could be collusion. Comey writing, he said that if there was some satellite, no, I took this to mean some associate of his or his campaign that did something, it would be good to find that out. But that he hadn't done anything and hoped I would find a way to get out that we weren't investigating him. The memos also reveal that while President Trump asked Comey if he could let the Michael Flynn matter go, he also had serious reservations about Flynn, after Flynn neglected to mention for 6 days that Vladimir Putin had called to congratulate the president on his inauguration. Comey writes, in telling the story, the president pointed fingers at his head and said, the guy has serious judgment issues. And a development today in Los Angeles in the Stormy Daniels case. A judge there gave Michael Cohen until Wednesday to explain why the Stormy Daniels civil case should be delayed. Cohen is seeking a postponement of the Daniels civil case while the criminal investigation into his business dealings goes forward in New York. Brett?
John Roberts traveling with the president. John, thank you. Let's get reaction tonight from House Oversight Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy, instrumental in getting those Comey memos released. He joins us live this evening from Greenville, South Carolina. Mr. Chairman, thanks for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I want to start by talking about the release of the memos, first of all. You have New York Congressman Jerry Nadler, ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, saying this: the release of these memos under the threat of subpoena by the majority has accomplished little other than corroborating Mr. Comey's previous testimony. Your reaction to that?
I read the memo 6 months ago. I think it's important for all members of Congress and ultimately the public to be able to see them. You can rest assured, Brett, if there was anything really, really important in these memos, the Democrats would have leaked what they read 6 months ago. I do think it's important that President Trump said, if any of my associates were involved in this collusion, I want to know it. I think it's really important that the Russia cloud the Democrats keep talking about was the salacious allegation of sexual misconduct. It was not the interference, and I think we've all learned a little bit more about Jim Comey as he goes on his morality tour over the next couple of weeks.
Do you think he broke the law by leaking those memos?
Have no way of knowing, and unlike Jim Comey, I don't compare people to mob bosses. I don't say they're unfit for office. I don't say they ought to be impeached. I trust Michael Horowitz. I think Michael Horowitz has done a fantastic job so far. That's the Inspector General. Let's let him figure out which memos were given to the law professor and whether or not they can contain any classified information.
But if they did, he would have broken the law.
Not by the standard he set in the summer of 2016. God knows how hard it would be to win that case. Remember, he ignored the statute that said grossly negligent. He now has a requirement. It has to be intentional, and you have to do it to harm the United States. So under the standard he set in the summer of 2016 with Secretary Clinton, I don't think Jesus could win that case.
Now, what other things struck you about these memos? There was one part in which he references CNN. I said media like CNN had them, the dossier he's talking about here, and we're looking for a news hook. I said it was important that we not give them the excuse to write that the FBI had the material, and that part is redacted, that we were keeping a very close hold. He said he couldn't believe that they hadn't gone with it. This is the president speaking. I said it was inflammatory stuff, that they would get killed for reporting straight up from the source reports. I mean, it's important to point out that 4 or 5 days later, it's leaked to CNN that the president is briefed on this very thing.
Yeah, I actually think Comey is right that CNN was looking for the FBI to have that material so the story could then be the FBI's investigating as opposed to the underlying information. But what we've learned through this investigation is there were lots of people at DOJ and the FBI that were talking to the media, having unauthorized conversations, and we still want to know whether Brennan or Clapper, both of whom knew about this, one of whom was at the meeting, if not both, whether or not they could have been the source for CNN.
With all of these interviews, as you've been watching them, I've been watching them, Comey is going to be on here with me Thursday. What strikes you about this and what he's talking about?
Just the double standard, Brett. You know, when he was upset with President Trump, he leaked memos to spur special counsel. When he was upset with Loretta Lynch, nobody knew a word about it. Nobody knew that he didn't have confidence in Loretta Lynch. We just knew that he appropriated the decision away from himself. When President Trump asked, you know, go easy on Mike Flynn, he's a good guy, all of a sudden that's an impeachable offense. When Barack Obama prejudges the outcome of the Hillary Clinton investigation or the IRS targeting scandal, somehow or another that's okay. So the duplicity, the relativism, you know, Jim Comey said, I don't do sneaky things except memorialize private conversations. I don't leak, except when I do leak, and I don't do weasel things. I think this whole book tour is a pretty weaselly thing, quite frankly.
You wanted him back up on Capitol Hill to answer questions. What would you ask him?
Well, I want Horowitz's report to come out first because I have a lot of confidence in Horowitz, and I want to know. I want to know a lot of things, but I really want to know in 2016 why they handled Secretary Clinton's investigation in such an unprecedented way. And if he didn't make his mind up before July, why in the world were they drafting an exoneration memo press release in May? So there are lots of questions that I have for him, but I want Horowitz and Mueller to conclude their probes first. I think people are going to have confidence in the Mueller and Horowitz probes as opposed to Congress sometimes, but I would like to ask him more questions under oath.
Do you have any sense of when those are going to wrap up, either the IG or Mueller?
I would look for Inspector General Horowitz to conclude sometime in May. I don't know that. He hasn't told me, and he would not tell me. But I think the natural rhythm is sometime in May with the McCabe part already coming out. With Mueller, I have no idea. I'm not supposed to know. And if anyone does know, shame on the Mueller team for leaking it. And I don't think they did.
Finally, I want to get your reaction to this DNC lawsuit that is moving forward as of today. There are even some Democrats saying that it's not the right move, but you've been looking at this stuff. There are a lot of investigations. What do you think of this move by the DNC?
It's thin. It's thin as a wafer. I mean, the better suit is Bernie Sanders suing the DNC for conspiring to give her the nomination. That would be a very interesting lawsuit. But there is no evidence of collusion. I know Adam Schiff wants there to be. I know how desperately he wants there to be. But there's just no evidence of collusion. So if they want to sue Russia, that's fine. I actually would prefer the indictments that Mueller has against them as opposed to a civil suit. If they're upset with WikiLeaks, so am I. Julian Assange, so am I. But there's no evidence of collusion. So this is either a fundraising ploy or it's an effort to get people in civil court where you can depose them, so they can learn what Mueller's learning, and then they can use it for political purposes.
Last thing, were you surprised that Rod Rosenstein told the president that he was not a target of the Cohen part of the investigation?
I would be surprised if anyone used that phraseology because I don't know what it means. Now, I was only a prosecutor for 2 decades, Brett, so maybe I missed something, but that can change in a nanosecond. All it takes is one more witness to say something. So I'd be shocked if Rosenstein said that. I don't think the president is the target as you and I use that term in a non-legal sense. But in a legal sense, that can change with one witness, with one document. So you got to be careful giving people assurances until the end.
And does he keep his job?
I hope he does. I mean, I've had my differences with him, but I've got differences with lots of people, and I think they ought to keep their job. He's got a really tough job, but I've seen nothing in his handling of the probe. I mean, look, people are upset with the scope and the breadth of the Mueller investigation, and Rosenstein did draft that memo, but look, it's a really hard job to be the Deputy Attorney General. This is a really difficult environment in which to try to do that job. The president can get better advice than from me, but I would tell him to stick with the team he's got now.
Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your time.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too. As I said, I'll talk to James Comey April 26th, right here on set in Washington on Special Report. The U.S. did not cross any red lines with Russia when it launched airstrikes against Syrian chemical weapons facilities last week. So says Russia's foreign minister. Let's get a reaction to that tonight from the State Department and correspondent Rich Edson. Good evening, Rich.
Good evening, Brad. And it's one area where the United States and Russia avoided further confrontation. Russia backs the Assad regime. Its military is operating in Syria. And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told state media today, quote, "We told them where our red lines were, including the geographical red lines. The results have shown that they haven't crossed those lines. In other words, those strikes hit targets away from the Russian military." The two countries agree on little in Syria. The United States and its allies say Russia and Syria are preventing international inspectors from analyzing the site of that suspected chemical weapons attack. They say they believe Russia and Syria are working to hide evidence. Nearly 2 weeks ago, dozens died in Douma as a result of the alleged chemical attack, prompting the U.S., United Kingdom, and France to launch strikes last Friday. In Lavrov's interview, he also claims President Trump said he's willing to visit Russia after Russian President Vladimir Putin travels to the White House, though Lavrov says Trump has yet to follow up on that invitation.
He has returned to this topic a couple of times. So, of course, we informed our American colleagues that we don't want to be obtrusive and we don't want to be impolite.
Now, previously, the administrations had only revealed that President Trump had invited President Putin to the White House during a phone conversation on March 20th. He also says that the Russian president is willing to meet with President Trump, but there are no preparations underway for a summit. Brett?
Rich Edson live at the State Department. Rich, thank you. This is a Fox News alert. The Associated Press is reporting, and now we're getting some South Korean reports that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un says he will suspend nuclear and long-range missile tests and shut down a nuclear test site. The South Korean news agency Yonhap saying that he has announced that his country will suspend nuclear and missile tests. From April 21st, North Korea will stop these tests and launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles, says the agency. The North will shut down a nuclear test site in the country's northern side to prove the vow to suspend nuclear tests. The decision was made at a meeting of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party, the WPK, today. This is according to Korean news agency. If true, significant major win for the Trump administration as it pushes for the denuclearization of the Hermit Kingdom and obviously sets up this potential meeting with President Trump and Kim Jong-un. But again, North Korea is saying it's freezing its tests and launches for the time being. We'll follow up on that story. French President Emmanuel Macron begins a 3-day state visit to the U.S. here Monday. The French leader says he has a strong relationship with President Trump, but admits the two disagree on some major issues, such as trade and the Iran nuclear deal. Today in Paris, Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace sat down exclusively with the French president, and tonight Chris has a preview from Paris of his interview that will run on Fox News Sunday. Chris.
Brett, we came to the Élysée Palace, the official residence of the French president since the 19th century, to interview Emmanuel Macron. On the eve of his state visit to Washington, we discussed the major issues he and President Trump will try to resolve. But I also asked him whether the investigation by the special counsel and James Comey's recent attacks have hurt President Trump standing on the world stage.
Here in this office, I'm not the one to judge and in a certain way to explain to your people what should be your president, or to consider that because of these controversies or because of these investigations, your president is less credible.
Do you ever wonder whether he will serve his full term?
I never wonder that. I work with him because both of us are very much at the service of our countries on both sides.
We'll have much more of our interview with the French president on Fox News Sunday, including sharp differences with Mr. Trump over trade and the Iran nuclear deal. But that's it for now from the Élysée Palace in Paris. Brett?
Chris Wallace in Paris. You can see the entire interview Sunday on Fox News Sunday. Check your local listing. Safe travels, Chris. Fighting opioid abuse, it's not just a public health campaign, it's part of a political campaign. We'll show you where next. Tonight, the politics of drugs. They're at the heart of a contentious Senate race in West Virginia. 3 Republicans vying for the GOP nomination all have their own ideas how to combat the growing crisis of opioid abuse. Correspondent Peter Ducey shows us tonight from Charleston, West Virginia.
The candidates have spent time in either court, Congress, or a correctional facility. Now, Republicans competing in West Virginia's Senate primary are fighting about who is best positioned to fight the opioid epidemic.
We've been tackling the problem about as aggressively as any office can.
Patrick Morrisey, the state's attorney general, is taking credit for a court victory that just inspired a freshly proposed DEA rule which could cut down on opioid production.
Part of the reason why we sued the DEA is that we found out that the national drug quota system had utterly failed our citizen.
But in Washington, Congress cuts the checks for opioid prevention and treatment, and the only candidate currently serving there is Congressman Evan Jenkins.
I have served on the Appropriations Committee. The $6 billion working with the White House that we just approved is a significant positive step in the right direction.
Jenkins, who helped start a recovery center for infants born to drug-addicted mothers, is also trying to convince voters that the Attorney General Morrissey has ties to the industry, partly blamed for the state's drug problem.
If a person has deep roots and relationships from all of his lobbying experience with Big Pharma, I don't know how we can trust him.
Morrissey doesn't think Jenkins can credibly make that claim.
I think Evan Jenkins is a hypocrite, and Evan Jenkins, for many years in his career, took massive quantities of money from the pharmaceutical industry when he was the head of the State Medical Association.
Now a fresh set of eyes on the epidemic comes from the contender fresh out of prison, former coal baron Don Blankenship, who served a year on misdemeanor charges tied to the Upper Big Branch mine disaster.
The wall is very important. Ending the sanctuary cities is important. Drug testing public officials, particularly teachers and judges and prosecutors, is important.
His ideas mirror the president's, and Blankenship believes Jenkins and Morrissey each had a chance to address opioids when elected and blew it.
Well, I think that both of them are greatly responsible for the epidemic because they haven't done enough.
It's rare for there to be a competitive Republican primary in this state. So this is the most detailed that Republicans running for statewide office have gotten in debates about opioids in years. And there's urgency because the CDC says that West Virginia has the highest rate of deaths from drug overdoses anywhere. Brett?
Peter Ducey live in Charleston. Peter, thank you. Be sure to join Martha MacCallum and me for a debate among the Republican Senate candidates in West Virginia. We will bring it to you live from Morgantown May 1st at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This starts our America Election Headquarters series of primary and general election debates around the country. The top Democrat in the Senate says he now supports making marijuana legal under federal law. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says he will introduce a bill taking pot off the federal list of controlled substances, in effect decriminalizing its use. His bill would let states decide how to treat marijuana possession. 8 states and the District of Columbia now allow recreational use of marijuana, and a majority allow its use for medical purposes. Tonight, we wrap up our 3-part series on the future of American farming. Last night, we told you how difficult it may be to continue the generations-long tradition of the family farm because of factors including difficult trade policies with nations such as China and the possibilities of more tariffs. Tonight, a bit of optimism. Correspondent Doug McKelway tells us there's a new generation of farmers in America coming from a most unlikely place: big cities.
That left hip, that's what shows you how full they are.
Some might think C.J. Isbell is risking too much, considering the declining fortune of the American family farm. But here he is, selling the very beef, poultry, and eggs he raised as a new farmer on the land his ancestors tilled.
Trying to seize on that market opportunity by that void is why we got into producing it. And we were fortunate in that aspect to be so successful with the timing.
CJ is at the forefront of a renaissance in small farming. He's hedging against farming's inherent risk by holding on to a second job as a D.C. firefighter with a specialty in rescues.
I love being a big city fireman and then coming home to the country.
Thousands of others like CJ are returning to the land, combining old school farming with 21st century marketing.
Many beginning farmers are now starting in a direct-to-retail sort of a business, like selling direct at a farmer's market or through a community-supported agriculture subscription sort of marketplace.
Lobbyist Gary Madison should know in 2 weeks he's leaving the Washington rat race, returning to his family farm in New Hampshire to raise beef, hoping to capitalize on the new retail trend to grow and eat locally.
Yeah, we all used to eat local food, right? I mean, food was grown near us, and our diets were regularly changed by what was in season near us. And, you know, we had regional foods.
Congress is intent on expanding opportunities. One bill sponsored by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell would remove hemp from the Controlled Substances Act. With its soil replenishing qualities and uses in fabric, food, lotions, and anti-seizure oils, many farmers are convinced it's a potential replacement for a bygone cash crop, tobacco.
Time and again, they shared with me their enthusiasm for hemp's potential to re-energize agricultural communities.
An advocacy group, the New Young Farmers Coalition, believes Congress isn't doing enough, noting the Farm Bill now under consideration needs more incentives to attract young farmers to this risk-filled occupation. 97% of farms are still run by families. It requires long-term patience, a trait not often appreciated by the young or by any of us whose sustenance literally depends on farmers. Brett?
Doug, thank you. When we come back, mourners gather to pay respects to former First Lady Barbara Bush. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 31 in Denver as students in Colorado and across the country walk out of classes again, this time on the 19th anniversary of the Columbine High School shooting. It's the latest push for gun control following the school shooting in Florida in February. The organizing group says more than 2,700 walkouts were planned. Fox 10 in Phoenix, Arizona, another walkout. This time teachers vote to walk off the job next Thursday to demand increased school funding. The governor, Ducey, has proposed a 20% raise by 2020. Teachers say the governor's plan fails to address much needed funding for classrooms and support staff. And this is a live look at Philadelphia from our affiliate, Fox 29. One of the big stories there tonight, Southwest Airlines is giving compensation to passengers aboard that flight forced to make an emergency landing in Philadelphia earlier this week. Officials say an engine fan blade broke off in mid-flight. One passenger, you remember, was killed. 7 others hurt. Southwest has sent passengers a check for $5,000 plus a $1,000 travel voucher. Late today, the FAA ordered inspections of more jet engines like the one on that Southwest plane. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Looking at the markets today, stocks were off. The Dow lost 202. The S&P 500 dropped 23. The Nasdaq fell 92. That down day did not spoil the week, though. The Dow gained 0.4 percentage point. The S&P 500 jumped a half point. The Nasdaq finished ahead almost 0.6. Members of the public are filing past the remains of former First Lady Barbara Bush tonight as she lies in repose. A viewing for the 92-year-old Mrs. Bush, who died Tuesday, is being held right now in Houston. Senior political correspondent Mike Emanuel is at the church tonight.
Former President George Herbert Walker Bush greeted members of the public who came to pay their respects to his wife. First Lady Barbara Bush lying in repose at St. Martin's Episcopal Church in Houston. Some of the many who turned out say they felt a special connection to Mrs. Bush.
Whenever she planted her roots, she bloomed and blossomed things around in and around her, and she was an inspiration.
She loved our country. She gave so much. She helped so many people.
Those who knew her well remembered her too.
She said, you know, every day we should try to schedule something that helps others.
Tomorrow's funeral is expected to include 1,500 invited guests, including 4 former presidents and First Lady Melania Trump. Her son, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, will be the family member delivering a eulogy in what's expected to be a 90-minute service. In the city the former president and First Lady have called home since leaving the White House in 1993, there was a celebration of her life last night. President Bush sent a letter to be read talking about what it meant to them to have the Houston Astros win the World Series, and he asked his wife for help from above for Houston's basketball team.
We just need the Rockets to give our great city another world champion. Barb, they maybe could use a little help here. What do you think?
Last night in Dallas, rock star and philanthropist Bono paid tribute to Mrs. Bush alongside President George W. Bush. Bono reflected that at a time when most people were afraid, Mrs. Bush embraced those with HIV/AIDS, which gave way to a global fight against the epidemic.
When Barbara Bush hugged that child, stigma was a killer. I was thinking today, Barbara Bush, mother of PEPFAR.
Those paying their respects were genuinely surprised when President Bush and daughter Doro showed up. They shook hands with the well-wishers, and then the people were able to directly express their condolences to the Bush family. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live in Houston. Mike, thanks. Our special coverage of Barbara Bush's funeral tomorrow, 12 Eastern, anchored by Shepard Smith out of Houston. I'll be a part of that broadcast, as well as many other guests. The funeral of Barbara Bush tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Due to breaking news, we're not able to bring you that Whatever Happened To segment tonight on Atlantic City. We will have that from Rick Leventhal for you next week. Up next, though, the panel on the Comey memos and the Democrat lawsuit over the presidential election. First, beyond our borders tonight. Remaining immigrants on a caravan from Central America have resumed their journey toward the U.S. Those headed to the border are hoping to arrive by early next week. President Trump has urged Mexico to stop them. Palestinian officials say at least 4 people have died in clashes with Israeli forces on the Gaza border today. Almost 500 were injured there. Israel has warned it will not tolerate attempts to damage the fence or breach it and enter its territory. And the Basque militant group ETA is apologizing for the pain caused during its more than 4 decades of violence aimed at winning independence from Spain and France. That group, which killed around 850 people, including police, politicians, and entrepreneurs, is due to announce its final dissolution early next month. Spain's government is welcoming the move, but says the apology comes too late. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
Do you think these memos are part of the evidence that a prosecutor, Robert Mueller or somebody else, should be considering when determining the president's intent?
It's my recollection that is the evidence that will be used if there was ever a proceeding. These would be to show that I wrote it down at the time, sort of to bolster the credibility of my recollection.
James Comey talking about the memos that were released to Capitol Hill. Now there's an Inspector General report we can confirm into how he handled those memos and whether they were classified at the time. At the same time, the Democratic Party has filed a lawsuit, and they are suing this list of people: Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Jared Kushner, Rick Gates, the Russian government, the Donald Trump campaign, WikiLeaks, and George Papadopoulos. All of those people named in the DNC lawsuit, and even some Democrats on Capitol Hill are having an issue with that.
I actually think this lawsuit is ill-conceived, and I'm not very supportive of it. I think we have a very serious criminal activity underway in this country by the Russians and possibly by those within the Trump campaign. And to make this political is actually the wrong thing to be doing. I'm not interested in a political tit-for-tat. I'm interested in getting to the truth, and if there's criminal conduct that has been engaged in, holding people accountable.
Okay, with that, there's a lot of news to get into. Let's bring in our panel. Tom Rogan, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner, Leslie Marshall, syndicated talk radio host, and Matt Schlapp, contributor with The Hill. Okay, Matt, let's start with the DNC. You know, some people saying this is a fundraising gambit, others saying this is not to get people to be deposed and continue this thing, even if these investigations wrap up. How do you see it?
It is the dumbest political move I've seen in a long time because it makes it all about politics. Those of us who go on TV every day and explain that that this whole investigation with Russia is a canard and it's about the Democrats making politics, the DNC just confirmed it. And the irony of this, as Trey Gowdy said earlier on Fox, is the irony of that is if anybody has a beef on collusion and rigging something, it's Bernie Sanders with what the then DNC chairman Debbie Wasserman Schultz did with that nominating process. So I can't get inside their heads to see what their motivation was, but as a Republican, it's pretty stupid.
Well, you share that opinion with the President of the United States. So within the past few minutes, actually 7 minutes ago, he just tweeted out, just heard the campaign was sued by the obstructionist Democrats. This can be good news in that we will now counter for the DNC server that they refused to give to the FBI. The Wendy Wasserman Schultz servers and documents held by Pakistani mystery man and Clinton emails. Debbie, I'm sure he's talking about Debbie Wasserman Schultz, but the president obviously weighing in, saying that they'll go after the Democrats for all of that.
And both sides are wrong for doing this. Yes, Matt, don't feign. I agree with you a little bit here. What the American people want is less of this, right? They want less of the swamp. They want less of both Democrats and Republicans and the president certainly to be in the weeds. Again, the president constantly says there's a witch hunt, there's no collusion. Just let Mueller do his job. Let the investigation play out. Everything else is a distraction. Comey is a distraction. This lawsuit is a distraction. The president's tweets are a distraction. And the president responding in the way that he's threatening to respond, this would be yet another distraction. I don't think it helps either party or the president.
Tom?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's inherently politicized now, and I think the blurring, most people watching this, certainly my grandfather last night when I was watching this show with him, is the perception that everything, whether it be McCabe, Comey, the president, the DNC today, comes together and it's inherently politicized. And the problem with that, ultimately, is that when the final decision comes, whether it be from Mueller or any of these investigations, a lot of the country are just not going to believe it. And so the credibility of institutions, the capital behind us, you know, that is something that is suffering here.
In the Comey memos, January 28th, 2017, one of the memos, he says this: I explained that he could count on me to always tell him the truth, talking to the president there. I said, I don't do sneaky things. I don't leak. I don't do weasel moves. Obviously, he leaked those memos to his friend, and now there's an IG investigation whether those memos contain classified information.
Right, and he didn't tell the president that this sex stuff, the dossier, was funded by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign and his political opponents. And obviously, Jim Comey went before Congress and in two different topics, in two separate months, sequential months, gave different answers as to whether or not the president put political pressure on him to open or shut the investigation on Mike Flynn. The problem with Jim Comey is that he has an amazing lack of how he is coming across to the American people. He lacks so much credibility. And I think these memos do nothing to add anything to his side of the equation that somehow the president was acting inappropriately.
Well, Democrats say they show that he has the same thoughts then as he has now, and he wrote it down extemporaneously at the time.
He lied to Democrats in Congress. On two occasions, he gave different testimony in May of 17 that he gave in June of 17. He's got to deal with Congress on that.
All right, let's see if I can get this one. House Committee Chairs Goodlatte, Gowdy, and Nunes on the Comey memos. They write this: the memos also show former Director Comey never wrote that he felt obstructed or threatened. He never once mentioned the most relevant fact of all, which was whether he felt obstructed in his investigation. The memos show Comey was blind to biases within the FBI and had terrible judgment with respect to his deputy, Andrew McCabe. On multiple occasions, he, in his own words, defended the character of McCabe after President Trump questioned McCabe. Leslie.
I have to say that when I heard he was writing a book, I was hoping he wouldn't do some of what he did. Two of the things that bother me as a Democrat are, one, really stooping to the juvenile level of some of the president's tweets, talking about his hands, talking about his hair. Two, even talking about Russia or obstruction of justice can obstruct, in a sense, the entire investigation and derail what's already been done. So I definitely have a problem with that. It's obvious that this man was angry that he was fired, and many of us are, and many people in Washington write books afterward. I don't think that Comey has helped himself with this if he's planning on running for office, but I don't think it's going to weigh into Democrats. I think quite the opposite. Republicans wanted these memos released. If anything, I don't think it makes Comey look as bad as the president based on the president's response and the president's behavior according to those memos, and really caring more about himself and coming off as paranoid.
We'll see how this all goes. Again, I interviewed Jim Comey on Thursday. We're going to save some time for North Korea. Friday lightning round, the breaking news: North Korea saying it will suspend nuclear testing. We've got the president of France coming. Chris Wallace sitting down with him, plus winners and losers. We'll fit it all in.
I would love to get married. Yes. Hands down, absolutely. Babies and everything. I want to be that soccer mom that's like, that's my baby! That's my baby!
Today, nearly half of American adults are single, and while it may seem like the odds would be good for meeting someone special, the reality is so different today. And a new documentary called The Dating Project follows 5 singles. It looks into the so-called hookup culture and found that many people don't even know how they would go about going on an actual date anymore. Watch this.
My name is Cecilia Lucia Campos Gutierrez. I am single.
My name's Shanti. Hi, boys.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm an active listener.
My name is Matt Shilton, and I am single.
It's like single, married, and then there's extra single, and that's the one that I would check off.
What is dating?
Dating in today's society is cruel.
I don't really think that anyone knows how to date. Like, it's not a skill that our generation really has.
In college, I would definitely say hooking up is 100% more common than dating.
Story of boy meets girl. Girl really likes boy. Girl thinks that boy really likes girl.
I wish you could just be old school. You know, like he looked at me, I looked away.
There's not that, you know, gentleman and lady kind of feel to dating. No limits anymore. Like, making out isn't hooking up anymore. It's way further than that.
There's a ridiculous amount of pressure on people. Mr. Close Enough is out there. Mr. Perfect, he's nowhere to be found.
About 8 or 9 years ago, I realized.
Boy, that it really says it all. Megan Harrington is the producer for the Dating Project. Megan, thanks for being here tonight. I've seen this as a parent. I think most Americans know exactly what you are getting at here. So what do we do to change this?
Well, I think it's a matter of culturally and individually within our own families to take back the date, to revive that lost art of courtship, to really talk about those topics too surrounding dating that might be difficult, you know, in the family life, but then individually go on a date. That's what the kind of the movie is saying, is like, let's bring back traditional dating, because there were many good things that that offers people a sense of
I mean, I talk about,
you
know, how I met my husband. My father talks about how he met my mother, and they just he listened to it like, oh, that sounds so romantic. And these kids love rom-coms, they love romantic movies, and yet why are they so paralyzed? Is it because they're always, you know, staring into their phones and they don't know how to relate to each other?
Well, I think technology definitely plays a role in the way that we use it. It's not bad in and of itself. I think there's a fear of rejection. There's a lack of courage to actually have to ask someone out in person and to put yourself out there. And a culture that makes things seem easy, possibly, and there's so much choice. And making a commitment is hard because there's so many other possible choices out there. Did I make the right decision? There's a lot of factors, and it just needs to, I think, be simplified to here's how you go on a date, and here's how you treat other people.
I think that last guy hits the nail on the head, because he says, you know what, Mr. Perfect is not out there. None of us are perfect. And I do feel like sometimes people are looking for this perfect image that they see on Instagram that doesn't even exist.
That's true, this idea of perfection and that we're all flawed. And, you know, Carrie Cronin, the professor at Boston College, who is amazing, actually has her student go on a date with somebody who's off-type, you know, someone she might not initially be interested in or attracted to show that there are people you might be interested in that you may not be giving a chance.
It's fascinating, and I encourage everybody to get their hands on it, and maybe we'll talk to that professor. That sounds interesting, too. Megan, thank you for doing this project, and thanks for talking to us tonight. Good to meet you.
Thank you, Martha. You, too.
You bet. We'll be right back.